Inflation is an increase in the average level of prices in an economy. Deflation is the opposite, a decrease in the average level of prices in the economy. Two things to keep in mind. We're talking about the average prices in the economy. So, not the price of your favorite brand of soap or the cost of a specific medical treatment. We mean the average of all the prices in the economy. Second, we're talking about changes in prices, not the price level per se. High prices are not indicative of inflation, but an increase in prices from one period to the next would be inflation. Now, hyperinflation, or inflation in excess of 200% per year, equivalent to prices tripling in an economy, is almost universally considered a bad thing. But inflation under 10% annually is generally viewed as within control, and whether it's good or bad depends upon your financial position. If you're a borrower, or someone who owes another party money, inflation is great. Why? Because inflation of 2% means the money you borrowed last year has 2% less purchasing power this year. So in paying back, in real terms, you're only paying back 98% of what you borrowed. Yeah, you borrowed $100 and now you're paying it back, but you borrowed that money last year. And in the time since you borrowed it, inflation has eaten into what that $100 can buy. This year, $100 can only buy 98% of what it could last year. So, unless the person you're borrowing from asks you to compensate them for inflation through, say, interest payments, you're really paying them back less money in an economy with inflation. That said, if you're the one loaning money, inflation is your perpetual enemy. You never want to be paid back less than you loaned in real terms. And if prices on average go up in your economy, then the real value of the money you are getting paid back decreases. That $100 you're getting paid back can't buy as much this year as it could last year. But before we can determine whether prices are going up or down, how do we even know what the average price level is in an economy? Say hello to price indexes. A price index basically looks at what the average price is of a predetermined basket or goods of services a household purchases in a single year, which we'll call the base period year. That basket price is indexed as the value 100, let's say to represent 100% of the value of the basket. Then that same basket is measured next month, next quarter, or next year. Whatever the new average price is, it's indexed in relation to that base year. For example, the price for a basket in year one may be $300. The economist measuring this would mark the value of that basket on the index as 100 in year one. Now let's say in year two, the exact same basket costs $450. The index value for year two would be 150, representing the fact that year two's basket costs 50% more than year one's. Similarly, if the year two value was actually 150, the index would have been 50, indicating that the basket costs 50% less than in year two. In quantitative terms, the current price index equals the current cost of the basket divided by the base period cost of the basket. While this is literally how the price index is calculated, usually the news just describes inflation in terms of its percentage change from one year to the next. The two major price indexes are the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, and the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, or PCE Index. They're very similar, except that the CPI doesn't compensate for what we call substitution bias, the tendency for consumers to seek out cheaper substitutes for goods or services that increase in value. And PCE tends to consider the total cost of medical care rather than just the cost paid for by households, as the CPI does. Additionally, the PCEs technically survey what businesses are selling rather than what households are buying, like the CPI. That's important because it introduces biases particular to the type of respondent. Do you really remember how much you spent on coffee on average this year? There are other differences in how things like seasonal adjustments are done, but these are usually inconsequential to the average economic observer. For an entire economy, we usually consider the implicit price deflator, which would give us the real value of all final goods or services in an economy. Or described one way quantitatively, the nominal value of GDP divided by the real value of GDP. If you wanted to know the real value of GDP, and you knew the nominal value of GDP and the implicit price deflator, you would divide the nominal value of GDP by the price deflator. The whole point is to figure out what part of the change in nominal GDP from year to year is attributable to the actual change in what the economy produces versus a change in the cost of what it's producing. Price indices are not without their biases and problems. I mean ones that are universal across price indexes. For example, they're not generally too good at controlling for quality changes in products or store preferences among consumers. But in understanding these biases and their sources, we can employ price indexes in a way that makes them a vital part of modeling the macroeconomy.